We're now going to be talking with Dr. Dale Mckinley. He is a political analyst. And we're going to be looking at Dada Morero being elected as the new mayor of Johannesburg, succeeding Kabelo Gwamanda. And I'm kind of wondering, is this going to now finally be the end of the musical chairs in the Johannesburg City Council, in the chambers? I just wonder what's next. Good morning to you, Dr. Dale Mckinley. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, we understand now that Dada Morero has finally been sworn in as the new mayor of Johannesburg. A couple of issues that are glaring. We also, I think we all are surprised by the fact that Margaret Arnold was unexpectedly removed from her position as Speaker and has been put in the seat that Dada Morero has vacated. Let's understand why that has happened. She seemed to have been very, very distraught by that move. We've heard reports suggesting that she was actually in tears when that was announced. How do you see all of this playing out? And is this the ANC once again flexing its muscles?
Well, as anyone who has been paying attention to the city of Joburg shenanigans over the last several years, I think now this is the 9th mayor in 7 years. So it's been a really quite a chaotic kind of show here. And this latest iteration of the coalition politics is a result of the fallout from the elections, clearly, in the context of the ANC in Gauteng, at least, performing almost the worst of any ANC provincial outside of KZN. I think 36% of the vote it received. I don't think that we should really be concerned with the individuals involved. I mean, the positions that get thrown around in the executives and who becomes MMC of what and the speaker and everything are often always the results of the backroom negotiations with these coalitions. And the coalition that the ANC previously had with the EFF, the PA, and others demanded that those parties be given, and Al Jamaa, of course, which was the minority party, be given some degree of sort of positions. Now that that's shifted, and you've got a ANC going pretty much with Action SA, and this just shows you how politics can change one day from another. Action SA was adamant just a few months ago that they would never work with the ANC, and now they're in coalitions on a case-by-case basis, and therefore the demands that they would have put on the table would have been obviously for their people to get into the speaker position, or at least those that they could agree with, and to push people like the ex-speaker, the ex-mayor into the MMC position. So it's all of those things are just indications of the musical chairs. I think where Joburg residents are wanting to find out is the first question you asked, which is whether this is sustainable or not. And my take on that is probably not. And the reason why is because the ANC doesn't have much muscle to flex anymore in Gauteng. I mean, it's 36% of the vote. It won a third. So even while it's still the largest party, it's certainly not being able to push its weight around like it did before and call the shots and everything else. And that's indication of a situation where the ANC is still trying to find itself, trying to find the right combination. So I think it's probably going to be the city of Joburg coalition arrangement could be quite, should we say, shaky, depending upon what happens in the larger context, and remembering that the GNU at the national level has its own dynamics that would put pressure on the ANC and Gauteng to possibly change the coalition arrangements further down the road.
So we know that the DA has criticized the coalition, obviously that has supported Morero, arguing that it aligns with the legacy of corruption and instability. Despite all of that, despite the DA's views on Morero, also given that he served as a mayor for 20 odd days a little while ago, do we believe that we need to have a strong person in that position? Because Johannesburg, the city of gold, is really a city of, let me not say the word out loud, but it's a dump. It's an absolute dump. Kabelo Kwamanda's claimed that he's turned a couple of issues around in the city, but he also went on to say that his hands were tied because there was this he inherited a very historically broken city, so to speak, or a broken system. And I'm wondering how the ANC and the coalition believes that the new mayor is going to be able to turn things around. How much time do we need to give them to start seeing changes?
Well, remember, the next local government elections are coming up in less than a couple of years. So all political parties, particularly at the local level, are going to be acting with that in mind. So in some ways, that's a positive pressure on the ANC. Your question as to whether or not this will fundamentally change things, no, it's not going to. Precisely because, as you mentioned, it's the same crew largely that has been in and out of these revolving doors at the city of Joburg for a while. And here's the catch, is that a lot of people expect that simply because there's a new mayor that there's going to be a new politics. And that misunderstands the nature of local government. The mayor might have some degree of power, he or she, to drive in a particular agenda, but it's the solidity of the coalition behind that mayor. And what that cabinet decides, or what the MMC, the Executive Council in this case, decides, and how it plays itself out in terms of the actual votes in the City Council. So the ANC, Dada Morero will be there. He'll say, we're going to look at infrastructure. We're going to start cutting the fat. He's already indicated in his first press conference that he wants to go borrow lots more money in order to be able to spend a lot more on all the things that need to be fixed in Johannesburg. But this obviously then raises a whole range of questions about, are you going to deal with any of the corruption? We have massive corruption scandals in the departments, in several departments, the tenders that were corrupt tenders and so forth. I doubt that he's going to be able to deal with any of these things, precisely because the person or the entity that needs to be able to drive a particular strong agenda here needs to be politically powerful and be sure of what it can do. Whereas the vast majority of the time, I would argue, here is going to be spent making sure that this coalition doesn't fall apart and pleasing all the members of this coalition. And that's the nature of in some ways, coalition politics. But this crew in the ANC is not used to that. You can see when Panyaza Lesufi, for example, got up and said, I refuse to go into a coalition with the DA like they've basically done at the GNU level. Well, then your options are fairly limited in the Gauteng situation, and that was an indication of their impotence or their political weakness, should we say, as the ANC in terms of that. So it's a difficult ask, obviously in this case, but my sense is that very little will probably change until the next local government elections, and if, which I would imagine, the ANC gets even a harder clop and the local government elections in the city of Joburg, then we could have a situation where the kind of coalition that could be pulled together would be much more stable, because it would have to involve the main opposition and the second largest party, which is the DA in this case, which has been left out of this coalition arrangement.
Having said all of that, you mentioned corruption. I think all of South African citizens are very concerned about that factor, because we've just heard on the weekend about all of the different mafias, corruption mafias that are operating right across the board. Undoubtedly, they're very, very active in Gauteng, in Johannesburg as well. What is it going to take for corruption to be stamped out completely, or for once and for all, or at the highest level? Because only then can we start seeing results. Only then will the money be pumped into infrastructure and where it's needed most. And Johannesburg and other cities and towns all around South Africa can start resurfacing from all the grime and the grit that it's been dragged into.
For sure. I think that this is a question that obviously goes way beyond Johannesburg, but in the case of Joburg, you're right. I mean, we've had our own share, just like many other metros and nationally, our share of corruption scandals. The latest, of course, and the most egregious being the Department of Health at the provincial level, where we've seen 2 key whistleblowers gunned down, much like KZN politics, where people are getting assassinated as a result of blowing the whistle on corruption, or show, bringing that to the public's attention. We've got that same problem here. So yes, this mafia kind of businesses in all sorts of areas and sectors is a problem here in Johannesburg. How is it dealt with? It's actually in the way in which our political system is set up. It makes it such that without the political will to tackle corruption, in other words, without politicians themselves who are in power, without that will, it's impossible. Because civil society can only do so much. You can change the people who are in power. You can vote them out. But if the next ones have a corrupt agenda and decide they're going to do that, well, then you're going to face the same situation. So it's a question of those who are there basically saying two or three things. One is that you must first of all arrest and prosecute those who were found to be corrupt, and this has not been happening. We've had a few arrests, we've had a couple of showcase trials, but we haven't had anybody really being held responsible. The confirmation of that, Panyaza Lesufi goes and reappoints the very same cabinet that he appointed prior to the elections, which were responsible for this situation in the first place. That's basically giving the middle finger to the electorate and saying, well, we really don't care, to tell you the honest truth. We're more interested in our positions. And as long as that kind of mentality reigns, the corruption will continue. What's going to take is the second thing is that a party like the ANC will get so smashed at the polls and will lose its power that somebody else possibly has the probability of coming in and saying, we're going to deal with this. So political changes. And the third thing, of course, is constant pressure. We've seen in Joburg that civil society organizations, community groups, residential associations have been on the streets, have been pushing. And even though that will have some positive impact and can put pressure on the politicians to begin to deal with these things, it's still going to be a situation of having people ending up in jail, in the courts. And when people begin to see that there's prices to be paid for being corrupt, that's when it will start shifting backwards. When there is a sense that you don't have impunity and that you're going to get caught and that you're going to pay a high price for involving yourself in the corruption, that's when it will stop. So that relates to our law enforcement agencies, strengthening the police, strengthening the Hawks, the NPA, all of the entities that would then pursue these cases. We need to strengthen those at the same time. So it's a multifaceted agenda to deal with corruption.
Sure. We have a long road ahead of us, don't we? Dr. Dale Mckinley, you are an economist and, of course, a political analyst. Thank you indeed for your insights. And we'll talk again. Go well.
Okay. Thanks, Julie.
It is exactly 9:01. We're into the second hour of News and Views this morning. A reminder that this hour is sponsored by African Muslims Agency. African Muslims Agency, a beacon of hope to communities for over 35 years in Africa and beyond. And I'm also pleased to say that our next guest, Nicholas Mabena, General Secretary of the Zimbabwe Communist Party, is on standby to talk to us about the SADC summit in Zimbabwe.